welcome. Wherever you are listening from, allow the day to loosen its hold. Let the room remain dim. Let the outside world soften and drift further away. There is nothing you need to focus on, nothing you need to remember, and nothing you need to stay awake for. This story will move gently, at its own pace, and you are free to rest whenever sleep finds you. Tonight's story takes place in a quiet corner of the world, shaped by cold air, mountains, and deep forests. It is a story without a name, without a clear beginning, and without an ending that offers certainty. It unfolds slowly, not through dramatic moments, but through details that feel almost out of place in their stillness. This is the story of the Isdal Woman. In late November of 1970, a woman was found dead in a remote valley near the city of Bergen, Norway. The place was known locally as Isdalen, a rugged and isolated area marked by steep hills, rocky ground, and silence that settled deeply once the daylight faded. It was not a place people passed through by accident. It was a place people rarely went at all. What made the discovery unsettling was not only the condition of the scene, but the absence of identity. The woman carried no documents, no passport, no name. Her belongings offered clues, but none that led to a clear answer. Everything about her seemed deliberate, controlled, and carefully obscured. As investigators began their work, it became clear that this was not a simple case. Each detail raised new questions, rather than resolving old ones. Labels had been removed from clothing. Hotel records revealed false names. Travel routes crossed borders quietly and repeatedly. The woman appeared and disappeared across Europe without leaving behind a stable identity. This was a time shaped by quiet tension. The Cold War was present, but rarely spoken of openly. Borders existed, but people moved through them with subtle caution. Intelligence agencies worked in the background, unseen and unnamed. In that world, secrecy was not unusual. Silence was often intentional. And yet, there was also something deeply human at the center of this story. A woman traveled alone. She stayed in small hotels. She walked unfamiliar streets. She carried belongings she never reclaimed. Despite decades of investigation, she remains unidentified. No family ever came forward. No confirmed origin was ever established. Her name, her past, and her reasons for being where she was have never been known with certainty. This is not a story meant to alarm. It is not a story meant to shock. It is a story meant to unfold slowly, detail by detail, as the night grows quieter around you. You do not need to follow every moment. You do not need to hold each fact in your mind. Let the information come and go. Let the rhythm of the narration guide you. If your thoughts drift, let them drift. If sleep arrives before the story ends, allow it to come without resistance. The valley where she was found remains quiet. The questions remain unanswered, and the story rests now in the dark, waiting to be told gently, one detail at a time. You are safe where you are. The night is steady, and the story can begin. In the late 1970s, Norway was a place shaped by restraint, distance, and quiet order. Life moved slowly, especially outside the cities. Towns were small, roads were narrow, forests and mountains stretched far beyond where people lived, creating wide spaces where silence felt natural rather than empty. The country itself was calm, predictable, and largely insulated from the unrest felt elsewhere in Europe. People trusted their environment. Crime was rare, communities were close-knit, and strangers were noticed without suspicion. There was a sense that things happened as they should, and that danger belonged somewhere else. Bergen, on the western coast of Norway, was one of the country's larger cities, but even there, life was subdued. The city was surrounded by mountains and valleys that pressed close against it, creating a feeling of enclosure. Rain fell often. Mist settled low. The weather shaped daily rhythms, encouraging people to move indoors early and speak softly. Beyond the city, the land changed quickly. Valleys opened into deep wilderness. Trails faded into rock and forest. Once you stepped beyond the populated areas, there were few signs of human presence. Paths were uneven, terrain was unforgiving, and sound did not travel far. In places like these, it was easy to feel alone, even during the day. This geography mattered, because Norway's landscape did not just surround people, it concealed them. In the late 70s, hiking and walking were common pastimes, especially near Bergen. Locals knew the land well. They understood where paths ended and where the terrain became dangerous. But for someone unfamiliar, the environment could feel disorienting. Valleys could look similar. Direction could be lost quickly, and help was never close. At the same time, Europe was living quietly under the weight of the Cold War. Norway, though peaceful, occupied a sensitive position. It bordered the Soviet Union in the north and was part of the Western Alliance. Military installations existed along the coast and in remote regions. Intelligence activity was rarely acknowledged, but it was understood to be present beneath the surface of ordinary life. Despite this, daily existence felt uncomplicated. People traveled by train. They stayed in modest hotels. They paid in cash. Records were kept on paper, not computers. Identity was not something questioned constantly. If someone checked into a hotel and paid on time, they were rarely scrutinized. Passports were shown, names were written down, and life continued. This combination of trust, isolation, and limited technology created a unique environment. One where a person could move quietly, pass through borders, and leave behind very little trace. One where questions, if they arose, often did so too late. Norway's natural quietness amplified this effect. Silence was normal. Solitude was not alarming. A lone person walking through a valley did not stand out. A traveler staying briefly in a hotel did not invite curiosity. In this setting, the idea of someone existing without a clear identity did not immediately feel threatening. It felt distant, abstract. And yet, it was precisely this calm environment that allowed a mystery to take root. When the woman who would later be known only as the Isdal Woman traveled through Norway, she moved through a country accustomed to quiet order. A place where people did not expect deception. A place where questions were rarely asked unless something clearly went wrong. The land did not challenge her presence. The systems did not resist her movement. And the silence did not interrupt her path. By the time something did go wrong, the stillness that defined Norway in those years had already done its work. Details were softened. Movements blended into the background. And a story began without drawing attention to itself. The mountains stood as they always had. The valleys held their quiet. And somewhere within that calm landscape, a life moved unnoticed, carrying secrets that would remain long after the time itself had passed. On the 29th of November, 1970, 2 young girls were hiking in the hills outside Bergen. It was late autumn, the time of year when the landscape feels suspended between seasons. Snow had not yet settled fully, but the air was cold, and the ground was damp with frost and fallen leaves. The girls followed a familiar route, one often used by locals seeking quiet away from the city. They moved into an area known as Isdalen, the name translated loosely to Ice Valley, though many referred to it by another name, Death Valley, not because of any single event, but because of its reputation. The terrain was steep and uneven. Weather shifted quickly. The land felt harsh and unwelcoming, even on calm days. Few people lingered there longer than necessary. As they walked, something unusual caught their attention. Ahead of them, near a cluster of rocks, they noticed what looked like a human form lying on the ground. At first, they hesitated. The shape did not move. The position felt wrong. As they approached cautiously, the details became clearer and the unease deepened. A woman lay on her back, partially burned. Her body was positioned among stones, as if deliberately placed there. Her arms were bent. Her head was turned slightly to one side. She was dressed in dark clothing, suitable for travel or walking, but damaged by fire. Around her, the ground was scorched in places, though the surrounding area remained largely untouched. The girls stopped. They did not approach further. Instinct told them something was wrong. They turned back and made their way down the valley, eventually reporting what they had seen to the authorities. When police arrived, the valley was quiet. There was no sign of a struggle nearby, no clear path leading to or from the body. The terrain around the site was rough, making movement difficult, but not impossible. The silence of the place pressed in heavily, broken only by wind moving through the rocks. Officers examined the scene carefully. Near the body, they found a collection of items that immediately raised questions. An empty bottle, a burned umbrella, personal effects that suggested intention rather than accident. The woman's passport was not found. No identification was present. Her belongings offered no name, no address, no explanation for why she was there. The condition of the body suggested death had not occurred immediately before discovery. Time had passed. How much time was unclear. The cold preserved some details and erased others. Fire had destroyed clothing and skin, but not enough to explain everything. What struck investigators most was the isolation of the location. Isdalen was not near any marked trail. It was not a place one stumbled into without purpose. Reaching that spot required effort and familiarity with the terrain, or a willingness to wander into difficult ground alone. The woman had been alone. No witnesses reported seeing her enter the valley. No one recalled hearing voices, footsteps, or signs of distress. The land had absorbed the event without reaction. As the body was examined more closely, it became clear that this was not a straightforward case. There were no obvious signs of violence inflicted by another person at the scene. At the same time, the circumstances did not align neatly with an accident. The fire appeared controlled, not the result of a sudden blaze. The positioning of the body felt deliberate. The valley offered no explanation. As the woman was transported from the site, the questions began to surface quietly. Who was she? Why was she there? How had she reached such a remote place without being noticed? And why had she been found without any form of identification? The discovery in Isdalen did not arrive with noise or urgency. It emerged from stillness, from a place already known for silence and difficulty. And once revealed, it refused to settle into an easy explanation. The valley returned to quiet after the police left. Rocks remained where they were. Paths stayed unmarked, and the place where the woman had been found became empty again. But something had changed. The land had given up a secret, and it would not offer another. Once the woman was removed from the valley and brought in for examination, investigators began the slow process of understanding what they were looking at. At first glance, the details seemed contradictory. Some elements suggested an accident. Others hinted at something far more deliberate. The body did not offer clarity. It offered tension. The woman was found lying on her back, positioned among stones, not collapsed or slumped, as one might expect from a sudden fall. Her posture appeared arranged rather than incidental. One arm was bent at an angle. Her head rested slightly to the side. There was no sign that she had tried to move after collapsing, no indication of frantic motion in the final moments. Her clothing had been partially burned. The fire damage was uneven, affecting certain areas while leaving others relatively intact. This suggested that the fire had not spread naturally. It had not consumed everything in its path. Instead, it appeared contained, almost controlled, as though it had been intentionally limited. Beneath the fire damage, her clothing revealed careful choices. She wore sturdy shoes suitable for walking in rough terrain. Her garments were practical, not decorative. There was nothing about her appearance that suggested carelessness or confusion. She looked like someone who had planned where she was going. Her face was difficult to examine. Fire and time had altered features that might otherwise have offered clues. Still, investigators noted that she appeared well-groomed. Her hair was neatly styled. Her teeth were in good condition, with dental work that suggested access to professional care. These details hinted at a life of relative stability, or at least intention. She was not someone living on the margins without resources. There were no obvious defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, no clear injuries consistent with an attack by another person at the scene. At the same time, the circumstances did not align easily with an accident. The location was too remote. The presence of fire was too deliberate. The absence of identification was too complete. Early on, investigators noted the smell of gasoline on the body. This detail changed everything. Gasoline did not belong naturally in that place. It did not fit with hiking or accidental fire. It suggested preparation, transport, intention. Someone had brought it there, either the woman herself or someone else, and it had been used purposefully. Yet even this detail did not settle the case. If the woman had intended to end her life, why choose such a difficult location? Why remove all identifying marks? Why take such care with travel and anonymity beforehand? And if another person was involved, why leave the scene so undisturbed? The body offered no immediate answers. The absence of personal identification became one of the most troubling aspects of the case. No passport, no wallet, no papers. Nothing that could be used to establish her identity quickly. This was unusual, especially for a traveler in a foreign country. Even in 1970, people rarely moved across borders without documentation close at hand. Investigators began cataloguing every detail they could observe: height, weight, approximate age, dental records, clothing materials, everything that might one day be matched to a missing person report. But without a name, the information floated without anchor. Time also complicated matters. The cold preserved the body in some ways, slowing decay. At the same time, exposure and fire erased details that might have been critical. Any subtle marks, any small injuries, any traces of another presence were softened or lost. What emerged from these early observations was not a conclusion, but a sense of deliberate obscurity. Someone had gone to effort to remove this woman from ordinary systems of identification. Whether that effort belonged to her or to someone else remained unclear, but it was unmistakable. Labels were gone, papers were missing. The trail ended where it should have begun. From the very beginning, the body itself seemed to resist explanation. It offered hints of intention without revealing motive. It suggested control without confirming agency. It stood at the center of the investigation as both evidence and enigma. As the examination continued, one quiet realization settled among those involved. This was not simply a death that needed explanation. It was a life that had been carefully concealed. As investigators examined the area around the woman's body, their attention shifted from the land itself to the objects scattered nearby. These items were few, but each carried weight. In cases where identity is missing, objects often speak more clearly than words. Here, they spoke softly, carefully, and without offering certainty. Near the body, officers found an empty bottle. Its presence was immediately noted, not because bottles were unusual, but because of where it had been left. It rested close to the woman, not discarded casually, but placed. The bottle showed signs of having contained alcohol, though how much had been consumed, or when, was impossible to determine. It suggested preparation, not accident. A burned umbrella lay nearby. Umbrellas are ordinary objects, meant to shield against rain or wind. In Isdalen, with its frequent mist and damp air, carrying one would have made sense, but the umbrella had been deliberately burned, along with other items. Fire had touched it intentionally, not incidentally. This was not debris from a campfire that had spread unexpectedly. It was destruction with purpose. Investigators also found remnants of clothing and personal effects that had been partially burned. What stood out was not only what had been damaged, but what had been removed entirely. There were no labels left on the clothing, no manufacturer tags, no laundry marks. Someone had taken care to erase details that might trace the garments back to a place of purchase or origin. The absence of a handbag or purse was also notable. Most travelers carry some form of bag. Even those who wish to travel lightly usually keep essentials close. Here, nothing of that kind was present. No wallet, no cosmetics, no personal papers. The woman had arrived at the valley stripped of identity in a practical sense, carrying only what she needed to reach the place where she was found. Among the burned items were traces of paper. The fire had consumed them too thoroughly to identify, but their presence suggested documents, notes, receipts, perhaps something more personal. Whatever they had been, they were no longer readable. Only fragments remained, darkened and fragile, offering no information beyond the fact that someone had wanted them destroyed. The pattern of burning mattered. The fire had not spread outward uncontrollably. It had been limited to specific objects. The surrounding ground showed scorch marks only where items had been placed. This suggested time and intention. Someone had chosen what to burn and what to leave untouched. The valley itself had not caught fire. Only the story had. Another detail unsettled investigators quietly. There were no matches or lighters found at the scene. Fire had clearly been used, but the tools to create it were missing. This absence mirrored the absence of identification. It reinforced the sense that what remained had been curated, not abandoned. The arrangement of the items also mattered. They were not scattered randomly, as if dropped during a struggle. They were near the body, grouped in a way that suggested deliberate placement. It felt ceremonial to some, purposeful to others. No one could agree on what it meant, only that it did not feel accidental. Each object raised the same questions. Why bring it here? Why destroy it? Why leave it behind? Investigators documented everything carefully, but documentation did not bring understanding. Without context, objects become symbols rather than evidence. They invite interpretation rather than offering answers. What made the items at the scene so unsettling was how little they revealed. They hinted at planning, at movement, at choice, but they refused to explain motive. They did not say whether the woman had acted alone or whether someone else had been involved. They did not say whether this was an ending or part of something larger. The valley kept its distance. Wind moved through the rocks. Mist settled where the fire had been, and the place returned to stillness. The items were removed, catalogued, and stored, but their meaning remained suspended. They became part of the case not because of what they explained, but because of what they erased. Whatever story these objects once belonged to had been carefully interrupted, and the interruption was complete. When the woman's body was brought in for autopsy, investigators hoped that the examination would provide clarity where the scene had not. The body, removed from the cold silence of Isdalen, was now placed under controlled conditions, where details could be studied slowly and precisely. But even here, certainty remained elusive. The examination confirmed that the woman had been alive when the fire began. Soot was found in her lungs, indicating that she had inhaled smoke. This detail suggested that the fire had not been something that occurred after death. It had been part of her final moments. Whether it had been intentional or forced was not immediately clear, but the finding ruled out certain possibilities and deepened others. The cause of death was listed as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and burns. On paper, this pointed toward a scenario that could be explained as self-inflicted, but the body did not fully support that conclusion. There were other details that complicated the picture, details that resisted being neatly categorized. Traces of sleeping pills were found in her system. The amount detected was significant, but not immediately lethal. It suggested impairment rather than instant unconsciousness. She would have been weakened, slowed, less able to respond to danger. Whether the pills had been taken voluntarily or administered by someone else could not be determined. The body could not answer that question. There were no clear signs of restraint, no binding marks, no injuries that conclusively pointed to a struggle with another person. At the same time, there were no defensive wounds that would clearly indicate an attempt to escape. The body seemed to exist in a narrow space between resistance and surrender. Investigators examined her bones carefully. There were no fractures consistent with a fall from height, no injuries that suggested she had slipped or tumbled into the rocky terrain accidentally. This further weakened the idea of a simple hiking accident followed by fire. Her stomach contents were analyzed, offering small clues about her final hours. She had eaten relatively recently before her death, though the exact timing was difficult to determine. This suggested that her journey into the valley was not one of desperation or sudden panic. She had been functioning, planning, moving through time deliberately. The autopsy also revealed something else that stood out quietly. Her teeth were in excellent condition, with dental work that appeared to be of high quality. Dental records often serve as a reliable means of identification, but in this case, no matching records could be found. It was another indication that she had moved through systems that did not easily connect back to her origins. Age estimates placed her somewhere in her early 30s to early 40s. Beyond that, little could be said with certainty. Her body carried no obvious markers of nationality. No tattoos, no scars that had been reported missing. Nothing that anchored her to a specific place or life. The autopsy did not deliver a definitive story. Instead, it presented a set of conditions that could be interpreted in multiple ways. A woman who had taken sleeping pills, a fire that had been set while she was alive, a body placed carefully among rocks, an absence of struggle, an absence of identity. Investigators were left with questions that medicine could not answer. Had she intended to die in Isdalen? Had she been guided there by someone else? Had the pills been taken to dull fear or to comply? Had the fire been her choice or someone else's? The official conclusion leaned cautiously toward suicide, largely because no direct evidence of another person could be proven. But even at the time, that conclusion felt incomplete. It explained some facts while leaving others suspended without resolution. The autopsy closed one door and opened several more. It confirmed that death had occurred through fire and smoke. It confirmed that the woman had been alive when it happened, but it did not confirm intent. In cases like this, the body often speaks clearly. Here, it spoke in fragments, and those fragments, once examined and recorded, were all that remained. Several days after the woman was found in Isdalen, investigators received information that shifted the direction of the case. It did not come from the valley, the autopsy room, or a witness. It came from a place designed for movement rather than stillness. The Bergen railway station. A set of suitcases had been left in a luggage locker. They had been stored there days earlier, quietly and without attention, waiting among hundreds of other bags belonging to travelers passing through the city. No one had questioned them at the time. Storage lockers were common, and people used them freely. A bag left behind did not immediately suggest danger or mystery. But once investigators connected the timing, the location, and the anonymity of the woman, the suitcases became significant. When the lockers were opened, what they revealed changed how the case was understood. Inside were clothes, personal items, objects that suggested movement, planning, and intention. The contents did not resemble the belongings of someone living chaotically or without direction. Everything appeared chosen carefully, packed deliberately, and arranged with order. And yet, just like the items at the scene in Isdalen, these belongings carried no identity. Labels had been removed from clothing. Manufacturer tags were cut out. Nothing linked the garments to a specific store or country. Shoes were practical and well kept. Dresses were clean. Coats were folded neatly. The woman had taken care of her possessions, even while erasing their origins. Among the items were wigs. This detail unsettled investigators deeply. The wigs were of different colors and styles, suggesting intentional changes in appearance. They were not costume pieces or novelty items. They were functional, realistic, and suitable for public use. This was not vanity. It was concealment. There were also sunglasses, large, dark, and designed to obscure facial features. Paired with wigs, they suggested a desire not to be recognized, or at least not remembered clearly. Someone wearing them could pass through public spaces without leaving a consistent impression. Personal care items were present as well. Toothbrushes, cosmetics, everyday necessities. These details made the woman feel real, grounded, human. She was not a ghost drifting through Europe. She was someone who brushed her teeth, folded her clothes, and prepared for the next day. What stood out most was what was not there. There were no photographs, no letters, no address books, no personal notes, nothing sentimental, nothing that connected her to another person emotionally. It was as if her life had been stripped down to function alone. Investigators searched for documents. Eventually, they found notebooks. Inside were handwritten codes, strings of letters and numbers that did not form recognizable words. At first glance, they looked meaningless, but as they were examined more closely, patterns began to emerge. These were not random scribbles. They were deliberate records. Later analysis suggested that the codes corresponded to travel dates and locations, cities, hotels, movements across Europe. When decoded, they revealed a quiet map of her journey, stretching across borders and weeks. She had traveled extensively, often changing names, often staying only briefly in each place. The suitcases told a story the valley could not. They showed preparation. They showed foresight. They showed intention to continue moving. The woman had not arrived in Norway without a plan. She had brought what she needed. She had left behind what she did not want traced, and she had stored her belongings as if expecting to return for them. That expectation lingered heavily in the air. Someone who plans to die does not usually leave their possessions behind in an orderly locker. Someone who expects to continue moving does. This contradiction unsettled investigators and challenged earlier conclusions. Why store the suitcases so carefully? Why pack wigs and codes? Why prepare for multiple identities? Why plan travel that never happened? The luggage lockers became a silent checkpoint in the case, a place where the woman's life paused, waiting for her to return, waiting for a continuation that never came. The station returned to its normal rhythm. Trains arrived and departed. People passed through without noticing what had once been left behind. But for investigators, the suitcases remained one of the clearest signs that this story did not end the way it appeared to. They were not the belongings of someone drifting toward an end. They were the belongings of someone prepared to keep going, and that made everything harder to explain. As investigators began tracing the woman's movements across Europe, a pattern slowly emerged. It was not a pattern of chaos or desperation. It was a pattern of control. Wherever she went, she left behind fragments of herself, but never enough to form a whole. Hotel records became the primary source of information. In city after city, she had checked into modest hotels, often staying only a night or two before moving on. Each time, she used a different name. Sometimes the names sounded Scandinavian, sometimes German, sometimes vaguely European, without pointing clearly to any one place. None of them could be verified. None matched a known passport. Each was convincing enough to pass without question. At the time, hotels relied on trust. Guests wrote their names by hand. Identification was glanced at, not scrutinized. Payments were made in cash. Records were kept on paper, filed away and rarely revisited. In this environment, someone who wished to disappear into anonymity could do so with ease. And she did. Witnesses described her as calm and composed. She spoke several languages, switching between them comfortably. In some places, she spoke German fluently. In others, she used English, sometimes with an accent that was difficult to place. No one could agree on where she was from. Each interaction left a different impression. This inconsistency was not accidental. She appeared to adapt her identity depending on her surroundings. Her appearance changed as well. Different hairstyles, different wigs, different ways of dressing. She did not stand out, but she did not remain the same. Each version of her was temporary, designed to last only as long as necessary. Investigators noticed that she often requested rooms with balconies. This detail surfaced repeatedly in hotel records and staff recollections. Why she preferred such rooms was never explained. Some speculated it allowed her to observe without being observed. Others believed it offered a sense of control or escape. Whatever the reason, it became another small piece of a larger pattern. Her movements were precise. She traveled by train, crossing borders quietly. She did not linger. She did not form visible connections. There were no letters sent, no phone calls recorded, no confirmed companions. Her life, as far as records showed, unfolded alone. The coded notebooks found in her luggage began to make more sense in this context. When decoded, they aligned with hotel stays and travel dates. They were not messages meant for someone else. They were records meant for herself. A way to keep track of movements without writing anything that could be understood by others. It was organization disguised as nonsense. This level of concealment suggested experience. Either she had learned how to live this way over time, or she had been trained. The question of training introduced a new possibility, one that investigators considered carefully but could never confirm. The Cold War context made such speculation unavoidable. Espionage existed quietly across Europe. Operatives moved under false names. Records were fragmented by design. And yet, there was no direct evidence tying her to intelligence work. No agency claimed her. No documents surfaced. No government acknowledged involvement. The theory lingered because it explained the behavior, not because it was proven. What troubled investigators most was how completely she had erased her real identity. Even after her death became known, no family came forward. No missing person reports matched her description conclusively. No one recognized her face. She existed only through the names she borrowed and abandoned. This absence raised a deeper question. Had she chosen this life willingly, or had it been chosen for her? Living under false names requires constant vigilance. It demands awareness, discipline, and emotional distance. It leaves little room for attachment. Over time, the boundaries between identity and performance blur. A person becomes the roles they play, even when alone. Her hotel rooms were described as neat, her behavior as reserved, her presence as calm but distant. She did not draw attention. She did not seek companionship. She passed through spaces without leaving an emotional trace. The anonymity she maintained so carefully in life remained intact after her death. As investigators pieced together her many aliases, one truth became clear. The woman found in Isdalen had not lost her identity. She had hidden it, and she had done so thoroughly enough that even decades later, it remained beyond reach. Her real name stayed silent. Her origin stayed unclaimed. And the person beneath the disguises remained unknown. In a world built on records and recognition, she had moved quietly between the lines. And when she disappeared, she took every version of herself with her. As investigators continued reconstructing the woman's movements, they turned to the people who had encountered her briefly along the way. These witnesses had not known they were seeing someone who would later become a mystery. To them, she was simply a guest, a traveler, a quiet presence passing through their ordinary days. Hotel staff were among the first to be questioned. Across several locations, descriptions shared common traits. She was polite, reserved, and calm. She spoke little unless necessary. When she did speak, her words were measured and clear. She did not linger in conversation. She did not ask personal questions. She behaved as someone who wished to remain unnoticed. Several staff members remembered her as solitary. She ate alone. She sat by herself in dining areas. She did not seek company. This was not unusual, but it was consistent. Wherever she stayed, she maintained distance. She was present without being involved. Some witnesses noted her unusual requests. In multiple hotels, she asked for rooms with balconies, even when others were available. She sometimes changed rooms shortly after checking in. In at least one instance, she appeared dissatisfied with her assigned room and insisted on another, offering no explanation. These requests were firm but not aggressive. She seemed to know exactly what she wanted. Her behavior in public spaces was similarly controlled. She was seen walking alone, often wearing sunglasses even in overcast weather. Combined with her wigs and varied clothing, this made her difficult to remember clearly. People recalled impressions rather than details. A dark coat, a different hairstyle, a woman who blended into crowds without leaving a distinct image behind. One witness recalled that she appeared to be watching rather than participating. In hotel lounges or public areas, she would sit quietly, observing the room without engaging. Her gaze was described as focused but distant, as if she were waiting rather than resting. This behavior did not alarm anyone at the time. Only later did it take on significance. There were moments that stood out more sharply. In one hotel, staff remembered that she paid in cash and appeared careful when handling money. She counted it deliberately, as though accustomed to doing so. In another instance, she declined assistance carrying luggage, preferring to manage it herself. These details suggested independence and self-reliance, rather than vulnerability. Her emotional presentation was consistent. Witnesses did not describe her as distressed, anxious, or fearful. She did not appear lost or confused. There were no reports of visible sadness or agitation. Instead, she was remembered as neutral, controlled, almost distant from emotion. This absence of visible distress complicated interpretations of her final actions. If she had been in crisis, it did not show outwardly. If she had been under pressure, she concealed it well. The woman witnesses encountered was not someone unraveling. She was someone maintaining composure. One detail that surfaced quietly was her tendency to avoid others' attention. She sometimes changed seats. She repositioned herself in rooms. She chose locations that offered a view without exposure. These behaviors were subtle, easy to overlook, but consistent. They suggested awareness of surroundings, not paranoia, but caution. She seemed attuned to being seen, even while avoiding notice. No witness recalled seeing her with companions. No one remembered heated conversations. No one described arguments or tension. No one recalled her being followed. If someone else had been involved in her movements, they remained invisible. What made these accounts so unsettling was their ordinariness. Nothing about her behavior screamed danger. Nothing demanded intervention. She moved through public spaces in a way that allowed her to pass without friction, without concern, without memory strong enough to hold on to. And when investigators tried to reconstruct her final days, they found gaps that could not be filled. No witness could say where she was headed. No one knew why she had chosen those hotels. No one could recall her final destination. The people who saw her last did not know they were seeing someone for the last time. They remembered a woman who existed briefly in their space, left quietly, and never returned. A presence that did not disrupt, disturb, or demand attention. And when she vanished into the valley at Isdalen, there was no witness to mark that moment. Only memory fragments remained. Calm impressions, quiet behaviors. A person who passed through the world lightly enough to leave almost nothing behind. As the investigation into the death of the Isdal woman continued, one line of thought returned again and again, not because it was proven, but because it seemed to fit too many of the unanswered details. The idea that she may have been involved in intelligence work emerged slowly, shaped by behavior rather than evidence. In the late 1970s, Europe existed under a quiet but persistent tension. The Cold War did not always announce itself through visible conflict. More often, it operated beneath the surface, through movement, observation, and silence. Information traveled quietly. People did too. Norway held a particular position in this landscape. Though peaceful, it occupied a sensitive geographic space. Its coastline and northern borders were of strategic interest. Military installations existed, some publicly acknowledged, others less so. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries monitored activity in the region carefully, even if that monitoring rarely reached public awareness. Against this backdrop, the woman's behavior began to feel less random. She traveled frequently. She crossed borders with ease. She used multiple identities. She avoided leaving personal traces. These were not, on their own, signs of espionage, but together they formed a pattern that investigators could not ignore. Her use of false names stood out most sharply. Intelligence operatives often relied on aliases to compartmentalize their movements. One identity for one location, another for the next. The fact that her names shifted depending on country suggested adaptation rather than confusion. She did not repeat the same alias carelessly. Each seemed chosen to blend in locally. Her notebooks added another layer. The coded entries, once deciphered, aligned with her travel routes. They recorded dates and locations without revealing meaning to an outsider. This kind of personal encoding did not require advanced training, but it did suggest a desire to keep records without exposure. It was secrecy practiced quietly. Then there were the wigs. Disguises are often imagined as dramatic, but in reality, subtle changes are more effective. A different hairstyle, a different silhouette, sunglasses. These small adjustments are enough to alter how someone is remembered. Witnesses struggled to describe her face consistently. That inconsistency mattered. Her preference for hotel rooms with balconies also drew attention. Some investigators speculated that balconies offered vantage points. Others suggested they provided discreet exits. Still others believed they simply allowed her to smoke or observe without being confined. No explanation could be confirmed, but the repetition of the request made it notable. There was also the matter of her composure. Witnesses did not describe a woman in distress. They described someone controlled, reserved, and purposeful. She did not seek comfort. She did not ask for help. She did not behave like someone unraveling under pressure. This steadiness aligned more closely with training than with crisis. Yet for all this, there was a critical absence. No intelligence agency ever claimed her. No documents surfaced linking her to espionage. No files were declassified that confirmed involvement. No former operative recognized her. If she had been part of intelligence work, it had been compartmentalized completely or erased thoroughly. Some investigators considered the possibility that she was not an operative, but connected to one, a courier, a contact. someone moving information rather than gathering it. This would explain her movement patterns and anonymity without requiring formal affiliation. But once again, proof remained out of reach. Others argued against the espionage theory entirely. They pointed out that intelligence work often leaves subtle traces, communications, contacts, signals. None of these were found. The woman appeared to move alone, without visible coordination. Her death, too, lacked the hallmarks of known intelligence operations. There was no extraction attempt, no recovery of belongings, no visible intervention. If she had been involved in something larger, it ended quietly and without response. What made the espionage theory persist was not its strength, but its ability to hold contradictions together. It explained her anonymity, it explained her discipline, it explained her movement, but it could not explain her ending. If she had been trained to disappear, why did she do so in a way that drew attention? If she had been part of an operation, why was her death left unresolved? If she had been valuable, why was no effort made to reclaim her identity? These questions softened the theory, rather than strengthening it. Over time, investigators began to see the espionage angle not as an answer, but as a framework, a way to understand behavior without assigning certainty. It offered context, not conclusion. The truth remained that the woman's life did not conform to ordinary patterns. Whether this was due to intelligence work, personal choice, or something else entirely remained unknown. And so the theory stayed where many others did. Not proven, not dismissed, suspended. In the quiet space between secrecy and speculation, the woman's story continued to resist definition, and whatever role she may or may not have played in the hidden movements of her time, it ended in a place where silence prevailed over explanation. The Cold War moved on. Borders shifted, records faded, and the woman known only by the valley where she was found remained unnamed, her true purpose resting quietly beyond reach. As the years passed and the case of the Isdal woman faded from public attention, it did not disappear entirely. It remained dormant, preserved in archives, referenced occasionally in quiet conversations among investigators and researchers. Then, decades later, interest returned, carried not by urgency, but by possibility. By the early 2000s, advances in forensic science had changed how old cases could be approached. Techniques that did not exist in 1970 were now available. DNA analysis had become more precise. Chemical testing could reveal details once considered unreachable. The Isdal woman's case, long stalled by absence, was reopened with cautious hope. One of the most significant developments came through isotope analysis. This technique examines chemical signatures within teeth and bones, signatures shaped by the water and food a person consumes during childhood. These markers vary by region, creating a kind of geographic imprint. Scientists believed that even without a name, the woman's body might still carry a trace of where she had grown up. The results were unexpected. Analysis suggested that she had spent her early years in Central Europe, possibly in Germany or nearby regions, before later traveling more widely. The findings were not exact, but they narrowed possibilities. She was likely not Norwegian by birth. Her origins lay elsewhere, beyond the quiet valleys where she was found. This revelation aligned with earlier observations: her language skills, her travel routes, her comfort crossing borders. But once again, clarity stopped just short of certainty. Further examination of her teeth confirmed the quality of her dental work, consistent with Central European standards of the mid-20th century. This reinforced the isotope findings, but did not lead to identification. No dental records could be matched conclusively. The systems that might have held her information were fragmented by time, borders, and war. DNA testing was also attempted. However, without a comparative database or known relatives, the results could not produce a name. Her genetic profile existed in isolation, like everything else about her life. It confirmed her uniqueness without connecting her to anyone. In parallel, researchers revisited witness statements and hotel records. Old interviews were reread, handwritten forms were re-examined, travel routes were mapped again with modern tools. Patterns became clearer, but explanations did not. Her movements appeared deliberate, efficient, and purposeful. She rarely deviated from her plans. She did not wander aimlessly. Whatever she was doing, she knew where she was going next. Public interest grew slowly. Journalists revisited the case. Documentaries were produced. New generations encountered the story without the context of the Cold War that had once shaped its interpretation. To modern audiences, the mystery felt both distant and immediate. Distant in time, but immediate in its unanswered nature. With this renewed attention came new theories. Some suggested she had been a refugee, displaced by the aftermath of war, living under assumed identities for survival. Others believed she had chosen anonymity deliberately, shedding her past and moving through Europe without attachment. The espionage theory persisted as well, softened by time but never fully dismissed. Despite modern tools and renewed effort, the case did not resolve. Each reinvestigation added texture rather than closure. The woman became more defined in some ways, more human, more geographically anchored, and yet her name remained absent. Her reasons remained unknown. Her final decision remained unexplained. What the modern reinvestigation achieved was not resolution, but preservation. It ensured that the story would not vanish entirely, that the woman would not be reduced to a footnote, that her life, however hidden, would continue to be acknowledged. The science spoke where it could, the records offered what they still held, and silence filled the rest. In the end, the modern world reached the same boundary the past had reached. A woman moved through history carefully. She left behind fragments, and when the fragments were gathered again, they still refused to become whole. The mystery endured, not because no one tried to solve it, but because some lives are constructed in such a way that even time cannot fully reveal them. When investigators, journalists, and researchers speak about the Isdal Woman, they often reach a point where facts begin to thin and reflection takes their place. This is the space where certainty ends and possibility begins. It is not a space for answers, but for quiet consideration. Without a name, she becomes many things. She could have been someone shaped by the aftermath of war. Europe, in the decades following the Second World War, was full of people who had lost homes, families, and identities. Records were destroyed. Borders shifted. Some learned to live without fixed routes, moving where work or safety allowed, carrying only what could not be traced back. She may have learned early how to adapt, to speak carefully, to listen more than she spoke, to blend rather than stand out. This kind of life does not require espionage. It requires survival. Others imagined her as someone who chose distance deliberately, someone who stepped away from a past she no longer wished to carry. Reinvention, after all, does not always come from fear. Sometimes it comes from resolve, a desire to begin again without explanation. In this interpretation, the false names were not disguises, but boundaries, ways to keep parts of herself separate, ways to exist without being claimed. There is also the possibility that she lived between worlds, not fully belonging to any one place, not fully attached to any one identity. A person comfortable with movement, with anonymity, with solitude. Such lives exist quietly. They rarely intersect with public record unless something goes wrong. Her behavior supports this possibility. She traveled alone, but not aimlessly. She prepared carefully, but did not hoard. She moved through public spaces calmly, without urgency. There was no evidence of desperation. No sign that she was running from something visible. Whatever she carried was internal, controlled, and well managed. What stands out most is her self-sufficiency. She packed thoughtfully. She paid in cash. She avoided reliance on others. This suggests someone accustomed to independence, someone who trusted her own planning more than external support, someone who had learned that visibility brings risk. And yet, she was not invisible. She ate in public. She stayed in hotels. She walked through cities. She existed in the open while remaining unknown. This balance is difficult to maintain. It requires awareness, restraint, and discipline. It is not something learned overnight. Her final journey into Isdalen complicates every interpretation. If she intended to end her life, it was done with a level of preparation that does not align easily with emotional collapse. If she did not intend to die, then something interrupted a carefully managed existence. Either possibility carries weight. What remains consistent is this: she was not careless. She was not confused. She was not unprepared. Whatever her past had been, it had shaped her into someone deliberate and composed, someone who understood how systems worked well enough to move through them quietly, someone who knew how to leave very little behind. In the absence of answers, she becomes less a mystery to be solved and more a life to be acknowledged. A woman who lived deliberately, a woman who chose what could be seen, a woman whose inner world remained protected. Perhaps that was her final autonomy, to remain unnamed, to remain unclaimed, to remain her own. And as long as her identity remains unknown, she exists in a space untouched by definition, not reduced to a single story, not confined to a single explanation, only remembered, not for who she was proven to be, but for the quiet complexity of who she might have been. After the investigation slowed and the records were returned to storage, the valley in Isdalen returned to what it had always been. Wind moved through the rocks. Mist settled into the low ground. Seasons passed without marking the place where the woman had been found. Nature did not preserve memory. It absorbed it. The case did not end with resolution. It ended with distance. Years turned into decades, and the story softened at the edges. Facts remained, but urgency faded. What had once been a question for police became a quiet curiosity for historians, journalists, and listeners far removed from the time and place where it began. And yet, the woman did not disappear completely. She remained in archives, in photographs, in careful retellings, in the spaces where unanswered stories tend to linger. Unlike many cases, there was no final document that closed the file, no official explanation that brought certainty. The Isdal woman did not receive an ending that fit comfortably into records or statistics. Her story remained open, not because of neglect, but because it resisted conclusion. There is something quietly human in that. Some lives do not resolve into clarity. Some paths do not loop back to a beginning. Some names are never spoken again. What survives instead is presence. A woman who moved carefully through the world, who carried herself with restraint, who left behind traces without explanation. Over time, people stopped asking only who she was and began asking something softer. What kind of life requires such careful distance? What kind of experience teaches someone how to disappear so thoroughly? What kind of strength is needed to live without being anchored to one place or identity? These questions do not demand answers. They invite reflection. Perhaps the quiet aftermath of this story is not about solving it, but about allowing it to exist without force, without urgency, without the need to claim ownership over a life that resisted being claimed. In the end, the valley did not reveal her. The records did not name her. The world did not retrieve her past. And that may be exactly how it remains. The night holds stories like this gently. Stories without endings. Stories without names. As this one settles, You do not need to carry it further. You do not need to solve it. You can let it rest, the way unanswered things often do, somewhere between memory and silence. The valley is quiet again, the questions are still, and the story fades softly into the dark, where rest comes easily.